I wanted to start by thanking you, Karen, you and Mike, owners of Courthouse. You've been so supportive of me, and I really appreciate you hosting this show, and also Irene and Sarah, your wonderful staff people. I wanted to thank Laurel Davis Huber, who wrote a beautiful essay for the catalog that Courthouse published for this show. Laurel's the author. She's a fiction writer. Most recently, her novel Velveteen Daughter was released. And Laurel has just been very generous with me. She allowed me to come paint at her home. So thank you, Laurel Davis Huber. And I wanted to thank my high school art teacher, artist Jack Bledsoe, who I recently reconnected with because of this show and social media. And it's pretty cool that I can still be in touch with someone who taught me in public high school in Bethesda, Maryland, many, many years ago, and was a formative influence on me when I was a teenager. So thank you, Jack Bledsoe. And thank you, Linden. You've been an artist who I've admired, has taught me so much, and we're going to talk about that tonight. So thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
So Linden and I, as I said, we're going to be discussing my work in this show, Hours of the Day, and we'll mostly be talking about the pictures and how we make paintings, how we talk about art together, our common process. But I will show a couple of Linden's works, because if you're not familiar, I mean, Linden is a nationally, internationally known painter, but for those of you who may not have seen his works, I'm going to show a couple of those. And Linden, when did you and Heather move to Maine? I think we moved to Maine around the same time.
It was in December of '89.
Yep,
We moved to Northport.
Yeah, yeah. So that means Linden and I arrived in Maine around the same time. Eric and I came in 1990, and we both coincidentally, not knowing each other, settled in the mid-coast area of Maine. And we met, I looked back at my old journals, we met in July of '92. I was involved in a cooperative art gallery in Belfast named Art Fellows at that time. I had admired Linden's work at Gallery 68, which John Ames ran in Belfast, and was really, I just thought your paintings were beautiful, and I was an admirer. And a colleague at Art Fellows, the cooperative gallery, hosted a sort of evening with an artist for the other other artists in the cooperative, and you were there and gave a talk to us, and that was in '92.
Right. Wow.
That was when I first met you. And then we stayed in touch, and eventually you invited me to come and study about color and color theory and painting, asked me if I'd like to come study with you privately. You had a few students at that time.
Yep. And it was like once a week.
Yeah.
Like a Thursday afternoon or something. Yep.
Yep. And I remember, I'd bring what I was working on, which was sometimes small works, but I also remember pulling up in my pickup truck in a snowstorm and unloading, 5-foot paintings and bringing them up to your studio.
Yep.
And we'd look at what you were doing, look at what I was doing. And for me, I really consider those years that I worked with you kind of like a graduate program for me. I mean, I really worked with a mentor who was knowledgeable in an area that I wanted to learn about.
So how did that work out for you?
Really well. I'm now trying to teach others. So over the years, we've talked about a lot of different things, and we're going to share that. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now and get the pictures going.
Alison, before you share, you might let Linden say something. He's a teacher, but we're sitting here looking at these violins on his workbench. Maybe say something about why there's violins there, Linden.
Well, that's my, I do that. I'm a serious amateur violin maker. So, and I'm in my violin shop right now because I don't have Wi-Fi in my studio, but I have Wi-Fi in my violin shop. So that's why we're sitting here.
How many violins have you made?
Well, I've been building violins only for 5 years, and I'm working on, just started my 25th. Wow. So they take a while to make, but yeah, I go down to Portland quite often, and I work with Jonathan Cooper, who is a well-known Maine violin maker. So he and I are friends, and similar to what Alison and I did, I'm studying violin making with John Cooper. So I understand how important that process is. And that's what works for artists. And I'm on both ends of it in this case.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda.
And if you don't behave, I'm going to start playing a violin.
All right, shall I start sharing, Karen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is a picture of Linden and me in Linden's studio in the year 2005. And I did want to mention Linden's violin making because along with talking about art through the years, many other things have cropped up about, as they do, including our shared love of music. And, you know, there's many interdisciplinary overlaps between writing and music and art. So who knows, you know, what we might talk about. But this photo was taken by the Maine Arts Commission for their publication. And it was a story called Artist Conversations about the relationship between artists. So what do you remember about that studio, Linden?
It was above the Masonic building, right in the corner in Belfast. And the window that you can see looks out at the co-op. So if you go to the co-op and look up, you'll see kind of a lean-to area. It's on the second floor. And this actual part of that building was a surgeon's, it was a doctor's office. And they would perform surgery right where Alice and I are sitting now. It used to be all skylights. This is from the owner of the building. He told me this in the late 1800s, whenever the building was built. And this was all skylight. So in order to get as much light as possible before electric lights, this is where it all happened. So if you had your gallbladder removed, this is where it happened. But it made pretty good light. It was a kind of a nice northern, it was a nice light for that. But
all right, let me move. All right, I'm going to show two of Linden's beautiful works. And this one is called Dance. And it is an oil painting on linen, and it is 16 by 26 inches. And Linden, would you like to say something about this?
Well, I spend quite a bit of time in Portland, and I just cruise around looking for pictures. And I've always noticed this building kind of sitting by itself. And one night I went by and I just said, I've got to do this, a painting of this building. It attracted me the sign. It didn't say dance on the sign. It is a, what is it, Alison?
It's like a Legion Hall.
Right, it's a Legion Hall. So American Legion. And actually Heather, my wife, she suggested, what if you put something social on the sign? And the sign reads dance, 6:30 Saturday. And that gives it kind of another layer of meaning. And I just liked it visually, of course. But I was also attracted by the flagpole and the big gun from some ship or some kind of old retired gun, and the snow, of course. But yeah, that's in South Portland. And it's quite near where you have a studio, Alison.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so you're looking at the lights of Portland in the background.
Right.
I'll go to this one is by Linden, and it's called Waterfront. It's also 16 inches by 26 oil painting on linen. And I love the nighttime winter feel of this one. And this is Belfast, right, Linden?
It is Belfast. That's the McCrum's potato. And when I was doing reference work, all I could smell were French fries cooking. So yeah, that's, but what attracted me to this was, of course, the grayscales, and we'll talk about that later, but also the smoke was a real challenge to paint. And at one point, I invented that center light that in my reference and in reality, there is no light there. And Alice and I will talk about the concept of color and light, etc. But I invented the light on, and that to me really made the picture because there was this central glow.
And add some orange light in a very cool blue.
Right.
Painting.
This is a warm, cool kind of contrast and comparison.
Yeah. Thank you, Linden. All right, now we're going to start with my paintings that are in this exhibit. Hours of the Day is the name of the show. This is a painting called Party of 4 at 5, and it's an oil painting on linen, and it's 24 inches by 24 inches. And I thought this would be a good point for me to just tell you how this idea for this group of paintings called Hours of the Day got started. So the past 2 summers, on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, which in Maine, I think we only have 4 hours of total darkness on the solstice because we're far enough north and east. I spent those solstice days painting on the Blue Hill Peninsula in Maine. So these paintings were all done in that geographic area. And I was really interested in looking at light and using paint to describe light. That's always interested me, but these paintings are particularly focused on times of the day, hours of the day. And, you know, how is the light that's in the morning, you know, the first light of dawn different from noontime, different from the evening? And how do we use an opaque material like paint to describe that? So I happened to think as I was getting ready for this, yesterday was the autumn solstice. So we're giving this talk on the midpoint after, you know, anticipating the arrival of darkness. So yeah, this group of paintings is really about how paint describes light. And I'm going to go to a detail of this painting. This painting is the Oakland House Inn, a historic inn that opened as an inn in 1889 in Maine. You know, there's a lot of historic inns in that era. Linden mentioned the inn on Monhegan Island, and it's their dining room at the inn. But I wanted to mention with this detail, so this is a close-up of one section of the painting. And when people look at my work and Linden's work, I think they see, oh, it looks very realistic. It looks maybe like a photograph, which is not my intention at all. And I'm hoping this detail shows you how it's actually very painterly, the paint handling. There's a lot of texture and there's softness and layering. So it's really not like a photograph at all. And there's, you know, 4 or 5 layers of paint very smoothly applied.
Well, that might bring up a point that a lot of people, especially these days, are looking at paintings, you know, on their computer or in print. And what you can't see when you do that is the actual texture. You can get up close, you can see how light hits it. And so then you can really see and how important it is to see the paintings for real. Because that's the full experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So this black and white color chart is not by me. It was painted in 1922 by an instructor at the Bauhaus School in Germany named Ludwig Hirschfeld Mack. And Linden and I may get a little technical here. I joked with Linden when we were rehearsing a couple days ago. He and I could probably talk for an hour about this grayscale chart. So we'll try not to bore you, but I think it's really important that you understand how this chart is helpful to us as artists. So what you're looking at is an exercise that was made by this art instructor, and there's 3 fields. At the top there's a field that's got a white background, in the middle has a mid-gray background, and the bottom has a black background. And across those 3 fields are 14 steps of it. I'll call it a grayscale, but where the artist would take, in my case, I would take black paint and white paint, and I would mix the increments between those 2, all the grays that would go from white all the way to black, and we call that a grayscale. Right, Linden?
Right.
Okay. And the thing that's interesting to me, this artist actually painted squares of paper and made a collage, but he was really looking at how those 3 scales, those steps, show the same steps from white to black. So for example, if you look at the gray that's sort of in the middle, the lozenge on the white, on the midtone, and on the black, that's the same gray. So the steps are exactly the same, but to me they look so different because of what field, what background they're on.
Well, that same principle applies to both the black and the white, because
Yeah.
when you paint a value 5 or middle value gray on that background, it basically disappears, as does the white and as does the black. And so as an artist, we have to compare everything we see to black and white, whether it's in color or not. A color does have a value that we can assign to that color in this grayscale. And we have to understand this principle.
Yeah. So you don't have to understand all the technical stuff that we're talking about, but keep this chart in mind, because Linden and I are going to mention it. And this chart is in my mind every day that I'm painting, because as I'm mixing color on my palette and putting it on my surface of where I'm painting, I'm thinking, how is this color working next to the color next to it? How are they influencing each other? And you all who are listening to this talk, you may not be aware of it, but your eye does that all the time. And I wanted to give you an example. Well, I'd like you to pay attention, and just briefly, if you look at this chart and you look on the upper left corner where there's a white background and then it's got very, very pale whites on it. Linden and I would call those, I don't know, with high values? Is that the high value end or the light end?
Yep.
So when I show you some of my pictures in a moment, if I'm painting a view out a window, I'm often, and I want the window to look like it's full of light, I'm often using just those values, just those tones that are very, very pale. On the other hand, if you look at the lower right corner where you've got black and you've got the lozenges of very dark gray on the background, you know, when Linden paints a painting of night, he's using a lot of colors that are that dark next to each other, and he might, you know, have some bright lights in that. But we're thinking about those corners. And I had an example that came to mind as I was falling asleep last night. Some of my family members live in San Francisco, where they've been having the horrible fires in California and Oregon and Washington State, and we're thinking of all you. But I heard from my family, and we all saw on the news, those strange days in San Francisco where the middle of the day, the light was just not right. It never got above twilight because of the smoke and particulate from the fire. So as a painter, I would say that didn't feel right to us. We knew it was wrong and worrisome, because on this chart, you know, everything was kind of like the gray in the middle. You never had the bright light of noontime. It was twilight all day. And I could, as an artist, I could think of that in terms of this grayscale. So, all right. I think, do you have anything more to add about that, Linden?
Except one thing you did mention, we kind of concentrate on the edges, meaning black and white. Yeah. And you want to reserve those, because as a painter, we have to, by artificial means, make the viewer believe that there's a light on or the sun is out. So we really save that very high little note of, and in my case, when I'm painting a night picture, I want to make sure I have that light, white, absolute highest value I can possibly get to replicate the energy of a light bulb. So I just wanted to kind of reinforce what Alison said about saving those things and having an understanding of them.
Would another way to put that, Linden, I often ask myself when I start a picture or even when I'm midway, where's my lightest light? Where's my darkest dark?
Yep.
Make sure those are right. Yeah. And I did want to point out right behind me here, I went home when I saw this chart. Sorry to interrupt you, Linden. I went home and tried to reproduce what I had seen at the Harvard Museum by doing this chart behind me, and some of you got a silkscreen version of it that I printed last year. So,
well, of our audience, I assume we have a fair number of painters or artists, but for those that aren't artists, next time you go look at paintings, this will give you, something to really kind of identify as you're looking at a painting, whether it's a museum or a gallery. Say, what is the lightest part of this picture? What is the darkest? And what are they doing to the picture to convey what this picture is, means, and describes? So that'll be good too.
I agree. All right, so we're moving on to another painting in my exhibition, and this painting is called Windbreaker. And there are two images here on your screen. One is the underpainting, that's the small image on the left, and then the other one is the color version. So I included these because when I start a painting, I start by doing an underpainting just in those black and white and grayscale. And that under all the paintings in this exhibition, there's a layer that's the foundation for the painting that is this underpainting in the grayscale, which is called a grisaille. And grisaille is a French word. It comes from the French word gris for gray, and it means a grayscale painting or drawing. And this is a very old way of working where you start with the black and white and then you add the colors. So Linden asked me the other day, why do I do this, or why would any artist work this way? And I'll let Linden hop in, but I'll start by saying, when I start a picture, I'm working on a flat area, and whether it's an abstract painting or a representational painting like mine, it's basically a division of space. You're taking a flat piece of canvas or paper, you're dividing it up to communicate a message to the people who will look at it. And if I design my composition the way I like it and do this grayscale painting, and it feels convincing, if it has a feeling of light and air with the gray paint, even before I've added the color into it, I know I'm headed in the right direction. It's already got life. It's already got a mood. And
Right.
The color will only reinforce that. What would you say, Linden?
I agree, and I do the same thing. I'm working on a picture right now, and I've gotten the habit of doing a small study for a larger picture, and I will get the study in this gray state. And when it has the mood that I want, then I just leave it there until I bring the big picture to that same place. Then I haven't even thought about color at that point. And then I'll go back and I'll work on the color part of this picture on the study, and I'll get that feeling the way I want it, and then go back to the big picture. So it's like separating sort of how our minds work. And because color is very complicated, to eliminate that one complication at a whole major stage in the process is really important to me anyway, and obviously to Alison.
Yeah. Linden once told me many years ago that if you do your black and white, gray and white, underpainting or your practice painting, if you do that and it has a convincing feeling, no matter what color you paint on top of this, because these paintings, I'm now painting on top of this, and the gray gets obliterated by the subsequent color layers. But, I could use any color on this. And if I matched the color to the grayscale, the way we saw in that chart, it would feel convincing. So there's any number of palettes of colors I could choose if I don't forget this foundation.
Right.
Yeah. So this painting, it's Windbreaker. It's 20 inches by 20, and it depicts Newbury Neck in Surrey, Maine. And I did take some liberties with the view out the window. I changed it a bit. Okay, I'm going to show you how I do some quick studies and sketches to get ready for my paintings. This is a 8 by 10. I call it a grayscale painting. It's using raw umber and white. But, I did this on the solstice in Brooksville, Maine. And, it was I probably took a half an hour, 45 minutes. I mixed up my grayscale with all those striations on my palette and just did a quick catch the light. And it's very loose. I would use this in my studio to make a finished painting. So this is a sketch for me to work from, and to get to a painting like this, which is called Oak Grove Conversation. And it's a 10-inch by 10-inch oil painting on linen. And this is Brooksville looking at Eggemoggin Reach, for those of you who know Maine, Little Deer Isle and the Deer Isle Bridge. So, I was interested obviously in the light, paler values outside the window, the paler grays, and that light coming in through that window.
So what's the lightest value in that picture,
Oh,
Alison?
let's see. Oh, well, it definitely would be the sky outside the window, or actually, no. I think it is the little bit of light hitting the lampshade. I think that is my lightest light, or the table surface. What do you think?
Well, the lightest light in the darkest dark
Yeah.
is nearest the viewer, so that would be a good thing to do, because that'll bring that edge of the table right close to the viewer, and it works very well in giving a sense of space and 3 dimensions, and the more pastel out the window is farther away. So that lightest light in the darkest dark is nearest the viewer.
Yeah, and those are the choices we make when we're designing the composition. How do we step people into the picture? How do we engage them in the story by using the color and the gray choices? Here's some more sketches I did on the solstice, and you can see these are little 5x7s. And the one on the left I wanted to draw your attention to, because that's the old inn at Oakland House. I think I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning on the dawn and painted that sketch as the light was coming up. And if you hold that painting in your mind, on that one on the left, the one on the right is a little interior. Those sketches led to this. And these are 2 paintings side by side. They're basically the same view. And the one on the left, I did at depicting what the light, it's called the coming day, what the first light of the day when it's just arriving, what does that look like? And the one on the right is called Fireflies, and it's the same, the same location, the same composition almost, but it depicts that at twilight, after the light of the day has ended and the light of the interior of the building is emerging. So Linden suggested that I talk to you about how the skies in these 2 pictures are different because of the time of day. I mean, the one that's dawn, the lightest part of the picture is that sky, that dawn sky, and other things. If you go outside at dawn, things are quiet and kind of muted, and the light is very soft. And, there are no shadows hitting, not really any strong shadows hitting anything, because the light is very muted. And we're waiting for the bright light of the sun to come up. And on the one that's at twilight, the sky, if you compare those 2 skies, that sky is actually a pretty dark gray. My lightest light in this picture are the points of light inside the building and the fireflies. So I thought of that grayscale. I thought of those lozenges, and I said, Alison, you better keep your sky pretty dark. You better keep your landscape pretty dark, and that'll make those points of light really look like light. That's something that I've seen Linden do masterfully many, many times.
Well, I might bring up a point also here, Alison. We didn't talk about this before, but if you'll notice the color of the siding in the house, that actually takes on a different color depending on the color of the sky. We think of, and it's called local color. The local color of this siding may be, blue or gray, but when the sky has a certain cast, it'll influence the color of the siding as well. Even the trim, in white will take on the color of the ambient light. So Alison has done a great job in giving that sense of light. On the left-hand, more daylight one, that's a warm white in the trim, and the one on the right, the siding goes more purplish, and the trim that's a neutral, but it takes on the ambient light of the sky.
You're right, Linden. I mean, that's not a purple building, but I made the choice to paint that color to describe the light that I was seeing. Okay, this painting is called Election Eve. It's 41 inches by 41 inches. It's oil on linen. And this is the painting I'm kind of proudest of this group. I'm not sure why, but it really felt like an accomplishment and was saying something that I was hoping to say. So this is the Stonington Town Hall in Stonington, Maine. And there's lots of things Linda and I could talk about in this picture, but I want to point out that part of what interested me in this picture, the way you're walked into the picture by those vertical elements of the vertical supports that are moving into those step you into the picture. They give you the illusion of perspective. And the boxes that are the voting booths that are inside the hall, I knew that dark blue would be something I really wanted to show, and the way that box exists and those voting boxes exist in the space. Probably the first thing that struck me about this room was the far room that we're seeing in the distance with the windows. It was a very light-filled, yellow, airy room, and I wanted to try and paint a difference between the cool entry of the room, where you as the viewer feel like you're standing, and use paint to kind of describe a difference between the cool ante-room or front of the room, the foreground, and the warm, glowy air. I'm hoping that I created a feeling of warm glow in the distance. Got any thoughts, Linda, on this one?
Well, a couple of things. One, I really love how you painted these triple wooden bench chair type things, because I think most of us have experienced that kind of, community hall, church basement type of, pull out 3 chairs at once and there's these wooden chairs. But I think you've done a particularly great job of painting these chairs in a kind of an economy way. But also I wanted to bring up kind of a cultural, we've been talking about how to paint and what you're painting, but there's, in Alison's work, there's a kind of a mutual understanding of spaces that we've all been in. A lot of them are communal spaces, like the series you did on libraries. And it's something that is a connector to other, well, Americans, I guess, but human beings. So I think that's very important. Drawing something representationally or realistically is one thing, but being able to connect to other humans is really important too, and have a shared experience. And we as the audience are having a shared experience by going into this communal room and voting, especially timely. But the folding tables and all that. And I think that is a connection to all of us. So,
thank you, Lyndon. I hope so. I'll respond to a couple of things you said. First of all, those folding chairs on the left-hand side. You and I make decisions as painters every day, and I put those there because I wanted I could have left that out. But I wanted something to activate that corner and step you in. So that was a choice I made. But thank you for mentioning the larger
it's a content.
The content, yeah, because for me, this is the Stonington Town Hall, but that's not the most important thing to me. I'm hoping to create something that has mood, that has psychological and emotional content that you can relate to whether you've been in this room or not, and that hopefully reminds you of something you've experienced. It tells a story, and where it isn't really the important thing. And for me, this is the lovely thing about art. A piece of music transports us when we hear it. Words on the page that are beautifully written do that, and that's the joy of art. That's our job, Lyndon, you and I, if we're making something successful, is to communicate that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right, let's move on. Oh, this is a detail of this painting, just to show you again the paint handling. And I did want to mention, I've painted a lot of interiors. I've also painted landscapes, but I've become kind of known for these interiors or insides of rooms and buildings. And there's a couple of things that are interesting, many things that are interesting about interiors, but I started doing interiors, I think, when I was studying with you, Lyndon, because I was trying to wrap my brain around what's a grayscale, how do you mix colors? And painting in the landscape, the light is changing all the time. When I went into an interior, I found if I sat in this room at this time with this light on, you know, this warm light, this cool light, it's 4 o'clock, I could get consistent light that I could try to understand. So
Right.
that
Right.
the interior was a way of controlling my experience as an artist.
And this picture particularly shows the idea of a real pastel light,
Yeah.
both in tonally and color-wise, outside the window, which
Yeah.
really gives it a sense of air and space.
Yeah.
The dark is dark in the window areas, that little tiny corner, the left-hand corner.
Yeah.
You compare that dark to, say, the side of the voting booth, and it's quite surprising.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of how you create that outside space.
Yep, yep. Yeah, so you're right. The rhythm of the windows in this picture is important. That also moves you through it. And each one of those windows is a fun opportunity for me as an artist to make a little painting within a painting.
Right,
So
exactly.
That's a picture frame with a painting waiting to go in it.
It's pre-framed.
It's pre-framed, and I can put whatever I want to in there.
Yeah,
and I do think, you know, I did think a lot with this one. Where's my lightest light? Where's my darkest dark? That will help make this look engaging. So
I think this picture would have been much better, though, Alison,
yes,
if you had put a violin on one of those tables.
Next time.
Okay.
Okay, this is called Summer Shave. It's 10 inches by 10 inches oil on panel. And this is a friend's cottage in Northport. But I just loved the turquoise, the orange, you know, it's a classic summer cottage. And this one went really quickly and easily. And I thought I would mention, Karen is selling, the Courthouse did publish a beautiful catalog. All these paintings are in the catalog. If you want a copy of the catalog, talk to Karen. This is called Fundy Rising. And this is 10 inches by 10 inches also. And this one has a special place in my heart because I can't tell if any of my family members are tuned in, and I think they are, but this is my cousin's house in New Brunswick, Canada, looking at the Bay of Fundy. So I've spent many times in this beautiful house as a guest, and I know it well, and watched little children grow up in this little nook playing with books and toys. And, you know, of course, the Bay of Fundy is spectacular for watching the water rise and fall. And this dormer, just, you know, like a window, just, it was a frame that zips your eye right into that landscape.
Aren't there 50-foot tides in the Bay of Fundy, 50 feet in some places? That's a lot of tide.
My family will have to answer that, but I know they're really huge. Yeah. And I know
so when you build a dock, you need it 50 feet tall.
Yeah, and I know you can get stuck on Minister's Island if you don't make it over the sandbar fast enough.
Yep.
So, thank you, cousins. Okay, this is called Bedtime Story. It's 10 inches by 10 inches. And there's 2 pictures that I've included, this one and the next, to give you a sense of how I take that gray painting, which is underneath this color layer, and I add color to it. And I'm hoping you can see a little square on the lower right side of this screen that shows you the colors that I chose, my palette, to paint this picture. And this is something I learned from Linden too. The idea of choosing a limited palette to express a mood in your painting. And by limited palette, I mean artists have the whole color wheel available to us to paint and make art with at any time. And you know, the choices we make about the color influences the feeling in the painting. And for this
Can
painting,
I make one little
yeah.
interjection? And you'll remember me giving this example. For musicians out there, or especially people that play the piano, there are 88 keys on a piano. And that translates into, you know, how many colors in the rainbow in your paint box. But you don't necessarily have to use all 88 keys in the piano to make a song or a tune or a composition. You put it in a key, which has a limited number of notes, and the notes relate to each other. So artists make that similar choice to to choose a key in order to paint their picture, just like a composer of music will do a very similar thing. It's a choice, and they have a relationship to each other, and they complement each other. So
yeah, could be like a major chord, could be like a minor chord.
Right, right, right. Very, very close in feeling. Like the Impressionists, if we translate that into music, that's a very high, light kind of palette. Or somebody like Ryder, who does these dark pictures, would be more of a nocturne. That's the opposite. And those are choices that the painters have made to convey a mood through color.
Yeah, yep. I did want to mention a friend of mine, Kareem Rustam, who is a composer. He influenced me while I was working on this project because he wrote a string quartet on commission that was called Shades of Night. And it was, I think, 9 movements describing the different hours of darkness through the night. And he described it in 4 string instruments. So, a lot of parallels. But
did you mention stringed instruments?
It's a string quartet that he composed.
We haven't talked about violins for quite a while.
Okay, you're going to hijack my talk with music, which I love. Nothing I'd like better than to hear you play some music. All right, well, there was something else I wanted to add, but it'll probably come to me. This is called The Vote. It's 10 inches by 10 inches. I chose a totally different palette for this one. And this one is more of an orange to blue, whereas this one was more looking yellow to purple. So,
Alison, when you choose a palette, does an interior or an exterior, how does that influence your choices of palettes? Because you paint both.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It depends on what I want to communicate, but I would say in general, interiors have, all the light and shadow. They tend to have really interesting neutrals or grays and browns. Not everything is as vivid. The daylight of being outdoors, or even the dusk, I think I would call them higher chroma colors.
Okay.
But that's my choice. I've seen lots of beautiful landscapes that are done. Andrew Wythe, for example, done with browns and grays and neutrals.
Which gives it a certain mood.
A certain mood, yeah. Yep. I remembered what I wanted to mention, Linden, which is when I took a class with you in 1994 at the Farnsworth Art Museum, you had the students in the class, each student mix a different palette of colors. There might have been 10 or 12 of us. So some people had blue and orange and, on their palette. Other people had, different colors. And some people had, no yellow in their palette, but only, more somber colors. And we had a still life that was like a banana, a red rubber ball and a plate. And you said, I want all of you students to paint this still life, but you're all going to use a different, like different musical chords. Each of you will have a different chord, a different palette to use, but you will still be able to paint this painting no matter what colors you use. And then we looked at all the paintings at the end. So it was, I think I had a palette that didn't have a yellow in it, and I had to make a yellow banana, which, depending what color it was next to.
It was the most yellowest of all your colors would make the most yellowest banana you could get.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all right, we're almost at the end of the pictures here. This is called Crickets and Roses. It's 10 inches by 10 inches oil on painting, oil on panel, and it's a nighttime painting. And I was just charmed by this greenhouse with the yellow roses showing up in the the street light.
So the street light is the light source. So it's casting the shadows from the fence, and it's reflecting in those paned windows. Yep. And that's what you're seeing. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yep. I think there was, the street light was behind me as I was looking at this picture, making a very
that's a really nice palette.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
All right, this is our last picture. This is a landscape, so a little bit different. This is called Suzanne's Store. And for those friends who brought me to Cliff Island in Casco Bay many years ago, it's a place I've returned to paint. And I've been doing some painting, plein air painting outdoors, using gouache, just, good to keep your hand in with your hand-eye coordination, painting outdoors and looking. And, you may never show those paintings to anyone, but it's really good practice. So this painting was just so classic. This is a working fisherman's harbor where, lobster boats come in. That's the refueling area with the oil truck, and, come up and fuel up your boat. And the thing this was the last light of the day. So I was sitting on a shore, an embankment that was in shadow, and the light was hitting the far shore. So
Nice.
I'm thinking about temperature of the color so that's it for me and Linden. I just wanted to conclude by saying that I hope that these paintings have communicated to you who are watching something quiet and meditative. It's been a real escape for me this year. We're all sitting in our own rooms, our own places, connecting by Zoom, but the practice of being in my studio and working on these paintings was really restorative for me and just nice. And I hope that quiet contemplation comes through to you when you look at them. We're all sitting in our rooms right now, and I hope that you will think about, when you're sitting in your rooms, how you see color and light and how your hours of the day are as you move forward. So thank you for joining in, and thank you, Linden. And I think both of us, you can ask questions, as many questions about violins as you would like now. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Anyway, Katie Klein has a question for you. A lot of your paintings are in a square format, and she's wondering why you choose this format so often.
Excellent. And I will be drawing Linden in on this answer, but that's a decision that we make as artists every day, is whether you're a sculptor or someone who does video work. What's the format we're choosing? For me, a square is really interesting because it's neither a rectangle or a vertical. It's either landscape or panorama. So it's got a different kind of dynamic, and it's a different kind of puzzle in terms of how you move people. And I think it's also got a quiet energy to it.
It's solidity. I like the solidity of the square.
Yeah. And I also would say, Linden, that you influenced me in that, because I probably hadn't thought of the square much, but I saw you using the square and decided to try it. And because you also, how would you answer that question about the square?
Well, probably I started doing it because I had 4 of the same size stretcher bar. And
No.
so the rest is history.
Yeah.
No, but that's probably, I think I gravitated toward the solidity of it. And I was doing a lot of pictures which were very straight on and flat, the flat plane of a building. And it appealed to me just to design around that flat plane and to make 3 dimensions, even though I wasn't giving you 3 dimensions really easily by making a linear perspective. So it was just a challenge, but I also found it very satisfying, and like Alison said, very kind of calming and solid.
Yeah, I'll add one thing, which is when you're painting in the landscape, I'm struck by the vastness of it. You've got the sky above you. You've got your eye can turn as your body turns. You can see as many degrees as you want. And when I work on a landscape, some of you will be familiar with the work of Rackstraw Downs, but I feel like I want to use a wide when I'm doing a landscape, because there's so much I want to include. I mean, think of that picture I showed of Linden's at the start, those beautiful roofs, and the one called Waterfront, and the way you designed the shape of those.
Right,
roofs.
and I have started to do some rectangles for the first time in, I think, over 20 years. I haven't done a rectangle picture in 20 years. They've always been squares, but now this next show that I'm going to be doing will have some rectangles in it, because I'm just ready to do some
Yeah.
If we're ready to move on to the next question, I just want to remind people that if they do have a question, to please raise your hand and I'll ask you to unmute and to please keep your video off during the questions. The next question we have is from Paul Sheridan. And so Paul, if you go ahead and give your question.
Sure. So thanks, Allison. Great work as always.
Oh.
I recognize the Monroe Town Hall in the vote it's called, right? I've been
You and I have both voted there, Paul.
That's correct, yeah. You know, Mike, just a slight correction so people remember, this we just passed was the autumn equinox, not the solstice. Equal night day. So
I'm sorry, my error.
equinox, summer, winter, solstice. One thing I'm struck by, well, you got me on something else too with the square. The square is closest to the perfect shape, which you might call a circle. If we're still going to choose four sides and a frame, that's the closest we can get. However, your paintings, I look at them and I go, no, that's a 10 by 9.5. You've managed to give us illusions of height sometimes, and sometimes width, more often height. And some of that I think is because you often use single point perspective, like the Stonington Town Hall, the election eve, it's called, right? That's great. I know why you appreciate it among yourself. And sometimes I said, oh, look at that. She's got us zoomed in on something that's not really important. But then you showed us a detail. And the point that I had picked out as being a photographer, I sort of doing architecture, I sort of noticed where the center is, left, right, up and down, is the top of the finial of the American flag. There's just a small, handheld American flag in the window. That's the very center of your painting. And I don't know if you chose that. You'll tell us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, one thing about interiors that's fun, and thank you for those comments, Paul, is you're basically painting a box inside a square, boxes and boxes in a box. All those are design choices. And I think every time I make a painting, I think of the axis is where's the midpoint. If you divided that square into 4 squares, what's happening in each corner. That's a very old way of thinking about the division of space. And like I said, whether you're an abstract painter or, it doesn't matter what your content is. You're thinking, I'm basically making areas, shapes and colors, that rhythm of spaces on a surface. What would you say, Linden?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
That answers your question. We have another one. I'm not sure who it's from. It just says iPhone. Yeah.
Hi,
iPhone. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Oh, Tom.
Okay, it's Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tom.
Actually, I have a question for Linden. I very much enjoyed his conversation, and I'm curious, were you a musician first or an artist first?
Well, I'm not a musician at all, so yeah, I'm an artist first.
Well,
I'm a musician wannabe. Well, I know, but I'm a wannabe, so no, I'm definitely a visual, build something type of person, rather than, a musician. And if you want me to prove that, I could play you a fiddle tune, but I don't think that's a good idea.
I will mention that in June of 2012, Linden and I played a recital together. I played the piano and Linden played the cello. And I was taking piano lessons at the time. We were both kind of more beginners than we might be now. And what I remember about it was, my piano teacher organized the recital and Linden was kind enough to play with me. I was very nervous, and it was about 20 12-year-olds and me and Linden. And it was great.
That was fun. That was really fun. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
We have a question from Carol Davis.
Another cousin. Carol.
Do you have 100 family members?
Oh, pretty close.
I packed the audience.
I had an unfair advantage. I've known Alison since she was born, and her talent is exceptional. I am not an artist, but I am very proud to say that I own an original oil by Alison It was given
Excellent.
to me as a wedding present. My only question is she willing to share her talent with other areas of the country? Iowa cornfields, the far west, all of that could use all of the pictures of light that you're so good at.
Yeah.
And what you do, at least for me, because I'm a non-painter, is that there's an emotion that comes from those paintings, particularly the one about the election.
Yep.
It just nearly brought me to tears because it reminded me that voting is a privilege. It's not a right.
Oh, thank you, Carol. And yeah, you know, artists do residencies in other parts of the country. You know, I'd love to travel all over and bring my paints with me. I'm sorry. I think my computer is making noises here. Sorry to interrupt. But Carol, your words mean a lot to me. I'd love to connect with you and have a chat again. And I'm sorry that I moved you to tears, but that means a lot to me as an artist, that I communicated something to you.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
I have another question here by Lisa Gibbons.
Lisa.
Hey, Allison, so nice to see you, even if you can't see me. So this is a slightly different tact of a question. What I'm wondering is, I've always loved your interiors, and I always am intrigued by how there are no people there. And I wondered if your emotional response to that has changed because of COVID and the quarantine.
Lisa, I am not surprised you asked an excellent question, being the thinker that you are, the thinker and writer. Yeah, I did think about that, and I actually wanted to ask Linden about it. But, you know, people often say, why are there no people in your paintings? You know, you're in interiors, why are they empty? And there's a couple of reasons for that, but it is an artistic choice that I make. And, you know, I'm often, when I go to do a sketch, I'm often sitting in a room looking at the light for hours and hours. People come and go. And I have made paintings where I've had someone sitting in the room or, you know, being a presence in the interior that I've painted. And it really changes the story of the picture because it becomes a story about that figure and their experience in the room that I'm interested in, rather than your experience in the room that I'm painting. So, but that's not your question, Lisa. Your question was, has the pandemic influenced that? And this is where I'd be curious for Linden's answer, because I think he gets that same question. But it did occur to me that people probably aren't asking that of me as much because we're all used to sitting alone in rooms quietly or not so quietly for long periods of time now. And I think that the experience of being alone or with your family members and trusted sheltering quarantine mates has changed. So, Linda, does that answer your question, Lisa? I don't know if she's still there.
I'm still there. Do you see empty rooms differently now that you're in them more often as well? Or not really?
I know it's a privilege to be able to sit in a room alone by myself when many people are in rooms with many other people. I have the privilege of working in my studio. I can't say I see the rooms differently, but I will say as an artist, when the difficulty of this pandemic arose, I had to laugh to myself and say, I'm fighting for time alone in my studio every day. There's nothing I like better than quarantining. Phew, I'm off the hook. I get to quarantine in my studio. And no one will even ask me why. So I can't say that I see the rooms differently, but you know, how I feel in those rooms and how I think about other people in their rooms has changed. Linda, do you have anything to add to that? Because you're often asked why.
Well, yeah, I do actually, because there is a common advertising technique where you would put a person's face, you know, like large, and you've seen them in many magazines, where there's this unrelated person's face in the ad. And it's a technique based on the fact that we as humans gravitate toward other humans. So when you put a human face or a human figure in a picture, that it becomes about that person.
Mm-hmm.
Where what you and I do, we allow the viewer to be there perhaps by themselves, and they can kind of assess what they're looking at kind of by themselves without it being about someone else. Or in my case, it said people bring their own story to the scene I set. And you do the same thing in the interiors.
Well said. People bring their own story. And, I used to paint portraits, so I love to paint a portrait, but it's the story you want to tell.